Today, we're making XO sauce, one of my favorite condiments in the world. I remember when I was a kid, going to the Mandarin Oriental for the first time. Once we sat down, the waiter brought a tiny soy sauce plate with a cover and very theatrically unveiled the XO sauce as if it was a dish on its own. The taste was so complex and incredible that I still remember that moment. So, let's do it. First, we need to rehydrate the two key ingredients, the dry scallops and the dry shrimps. So, first, we rinse the dry scallop and we use equal part dry scallop to dry shrimp ratio. So in this case, we have 300 grams of dry scallop. We first run it under cold water to clean them a bit, because we're gonna deviate from the original recipe and actually make a scallop dashi to cook the XO sauce with. Perfect. So we cover with water and we bring this to a bare simmer. You can also soak it overnight with cold water, but for me, the soaking liquid becomes too powerful to cook the XO with. So next, we deal with the dry shrimp. For the dry shrimp, we discard the soaking liquid because it's way too powerful. So we cover it with a generous amount of water. And during the soaking process, we'll refresh the water a couple of times, just to get rid of the unwanted fishiness. With the dry ingredients, they take about 2 hours to soften. While that's happening, we'll prepare the rest of our ingredients. So first, and definitely optional, we have some canned dry abalone, which nowadays you could buy from most Asian supermarkets. This is now rarely added to the modern day XO sauce, but in the olden days, the name XO actually came from the grading of cognac, meaning extra oud, which at the time of the sauce's invention in Hong Kong was considered one of the most expensive liquors you could buy. And the idea of the condiment was just to add all the expensive dried seafood. So in that spirit, we're gonna chop some canned dry abalone. For me, I like to do everything by hand so that you can control the size of each ingredient, because you want to detect them, especially the dry scallop, in the final product. XO sauce is almost, for me, the wrong terminology. It's closer to an infused oil with dry ingredients than a sauce. Actual dry abalones take at least a week just to soak, and with the current cost, just eat them. Don't use them in a sauce. Next up, we have the ham. Now, traditionally, XO sauce is made from a ham from the Jinhua region. But if you live in the West, it's impossible to buy due to regulations. So today, we're using a 60-month-old Iberico ham. And once again, we want to dice them. For the ham, for 300 grams of dry shrimp, we're using about 100 grams of ham, because you want the taste of seafood to be the dominant flavor. Perfect. Again, I'm keeping them quite chunky. Next up, some roughly chopped shallots, about equal weight to the dry scallop or shrimp. Because everything will be fried in oil, you don't want them to be too small, otherwise the sugar content would burn. That's good enough for me. Next up, we have a whole head of garlic, again, roughly chopped. There's a reason why XO sauce are so expensive. I mean, it's so labor intensive. Ingredients cost aside, that is. Because we're adding everything at the same time, you want them slightly bigger than the shallots, because they burn faster than the shallots due to their higher sugar content. If you want a shortcut, use a food processor, but never a garlic crusher, because that would puncture the cell membrane, making them burn way too easily. If you really want a shortcut, buy XO sauce. Now, the ginger, and I'm using quite a lot of ginger, given the amount of fishy elements in this sauce. For 300 grams of dry shrimp, we're using about 100 grams of ginger. The ginger on the relatively finer side. Now, a bit of Thai chili. This is to taste. I personally prefer just a tiny bit of a kick, because you can always use XO sauce with other spicy condiments. So, not too much. After 2 hours of soaking, We have the rehydrated scallops, which you could easily crumble with just your fingers. And of course, we saved 300 grams of this wonderful, wonderful dashi, which is practically liquid umami. And we have the dry shrimp softened. First up, we'll chop the shrimp. Again, you want to feel the texture of the shrimp still. So don't pound this into a paste. If you want a more cost-effective version of this condiment, you can just double the shrimp and not use the dry scallop. It'll still be extremely tasty. That's perfect. Now, for the dry scallops, it really depends on the size of scallop you're using. So for something that's small, I wouldn't even chop them. I would literally just crumble them all into individual strands because I really want to see the strands in the final product and feel the texture. There should be no resistance to this. If you're struggling to separate the strands, that means you have not rehydrated them enough. Perfect. Now we can cook. So, stove on. First up, we have the ham. Even though we're going to end up using close to 1 liter of oil, I still like to add the oil gradually, just to not unnecessarily dilute anything. Once the pot is hot, Iberico pork, they go in. And we want to cook until the ham is crispy. When restaurants make this, they fry individual ingredients separately and then combine them at the very end. But for the home kitchen, we can just gradually build and gradually add oil. This way the flavors will also emulsify much better. I mean, even now the oil is gonna taste amazing. Once you can feel the ham has turned crispy, we add the shredded dry scallop. Every shred counts. It's full of flavor. And we make sure whatever we didn't shred properly will now be shredded. And because this is rehydrated, we can factor in the evaporation of water content before we top this up with oil to not unnecessarily dilute flavors. The smell is incredible. Now we can top it up with oil. And we cook until the scallops are golden. This is probably my favorite condiment. It's a coin toss between this and ginger scallion oil. By adding the oil gradually, you also avoid the problem of just seeing a layer of bubbles on top and not knowing the doneness of your ingredients. And the steam that's coming out is a good indication of when to add the next ingredient. Since we still have a bit of steam, we know we can evaporate a bit more before introducing moisture again. Now we have this beautiful golden color, the dry shrimp. Once again, we top up the oil. Again, we're close to golden brown, so the diced dry abalone, and they really add a lot. Once everything is golden brown, we add our mountain of vegetables. And because I know we're going to evaporate a lot of the water content and they will shrink by at least half. Once again, I'm not rushing in with my oil addition. And this you really need to mother, given the amount of sugar content in the shallots, in the garlic. Once everything is pretty homogenized and you could barely see the garlic, we introduce our wet ingredients in stages. First up, instead of using brown sugar, we have 50 grams of mirin, just for a bit more complexity on top of the sweetness. And we boil this until the alcohol has fully evaporated and the sweetness has been concentrated. Next up, we add the soy sauce. Light soy sauce this is. About 70 grams. XO sauce itself should not be very salty, so it's more versatile. You can adjust the salinity later on. Next up, a very generous amount of oyster sauce. About 120 grams, because remember, at that time in Hong Kong, oyster sauce was very expensive. I mean, it still is now. And this would really give even more complexity and umami. Now, we add about 250 grams of Shaoxing wine. I'm using a cognac bottle just for dramatic effect. And we now take the opportunity to scrape the bottom of the pot for any fond, any burn bits that's full of flavor. Once the alcohol from the Shaoxing wine has evaporated as well, we add our liquid umami, the dashi from the scallop. For a deeper flavor profile, it's 2-star anise. And we simmer this. What we want to do now is to use a gentle-ish heat to evaporate all the water content that we just added, taking all the flavors, but not the liquid. After about 20 minutes, we have our wonderful, wonderful XO sauce with literally just enough oil to cover everything. And through slow evaporation, the aromatic vegetables have really given this the texture of a sauce instead of an oil. And once this beauty cools down, you can put them in individual jars, top them up slightly with oil just to make them easier to preserve, and you have the most wonderful, wonderful condiment whenever you want. This is homemade XO sauce. I really, really hope you enjoy.